إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So we continue with our presentation on Zakah. And as we mentioned in this presentation, inshallah ta'ala, which will be our final presentation on this topic, we will deal briefly on those whom can be given zakah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, mentioning those who can be given zakah, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that the sadaqat, here referring to the zakah, it is only for the fuqara. Fuqara meaning those who are needy, wal masakin, the poor. And you can translate anyone as anything. Fuqara as poor, masakin as needy. But one of the difference between the fuqara and the masakin, as mentioned by many of the scholars, is that the fuqara, they are more poorer than the masakin. The fuqara, they can't find anything. They can't find any of their need. As for the masakin, they can find half of their need or less. But the masakin, the fuqara, they don't own anything. The masakin, it's possible that they own something. As in, you find in Surah Al-Kahf, the story of Musa, the ship that he went on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said that the ship, it was owned by masakin. وَأَمَّا السَّفِينَةُ فَكَانَتْ لِمَسَاكِينَ. The safina, the ship, it was owned by masakin. They were poor people, even though they owned a ship. They were described as poor because they can't find their full need. So the fuqara, they are poorer than the masakin. وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. The عَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا are the workers who goes out to collect the zakat, and they work for the sake of the zakat. If they do not receive a payment, if they do not receive a specific payment, then they are paid from the zakat for their work. وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Well, al-mu'allafati qulubuhum, it can refer to a disbeliever whom you fear for their evil. So you give them from the zakat to reduce their evil, or a disbeliever who you hope that he might accept Islam, so you give him zakat. Disbeliever, a kafir who might be a leader amongst his people, if you give him zakat, is hope that he might accept Islam and his people is going to accept Islam. Also, a mu'allafati qulubuhum can be referred to someone who is Islam is very weak, so you give him the zakat, is going to help him to strengthen his Islam. Wa fir riqab, refer to slaves. Fir riqab, people who are under slavery, Muslims who are under slavery. So you can use the zakat to free them or to help them free themselves. But the zakat there is giving to the master, not to the actual slave, the person who enslaved them, the person who owns them. Wal-gharimin. Al-gharimin refers to those who are in debt. Wafi sabilillah, those in the path of Allah, and this specifically refers to those who are fighting in the path of Allah. Wafi sabilillah specifically refers to those who are fighting in the path of Allah. It's not general for those who are in the path of Allah, or it is not general for the path of Allah. So it's going to include building masjid or purchasing mushaf. All of those are not included in fi sabilillah. The vast majority of the scholars, fi sabilillah is restricted to those fighting in the path of Allah, and some of the Hanabila, they include in this those fi sabilillah for those who need to do Hajj and Umrah, their forced Hajj and Umrah for their Islam. Their Hajj and Umrah for their Islam, they can't afford it. Some of the scholars, they include that, but the vast majority of the scholar, they restricted to mean those who are fighting in the path of Allah. And it doesn't include everything in the path of Allah, because if that included everything in the path of Allah, there would have been no need to mention all of these before. Because giving to the poor and giving for those who are working and giving to somebody who you hope for his Islam, those are all giving in the path of Allah in the general meaning of the word. But this here specifically refers to those who are fighting in the path of Allah. And for example, people who are studying, students who are studying Islam, they are giving zakat not because they are studying. If they are poor and they are in need, you give them the zakat because they are from the fuqara or the masakin. Wabani sabil, and this is important because some people, just because they are students, they consider themselves to be in the path of Allah and they collect zakat, and they are not in any need. They have wealth and they are even rich, so they have no right to collect zakat. Wabani sabil, referring to the traveler who is who lost his ties with his country and his means to reach back to his country, and he doesn't have any ties to his country. And this Wabani sabil is very uncommon today, because many people, when they travel, they have their backyard, they can call their family can Western Union them some money, MoneyGram them some money. There are too many means for a person to be connected back to his family and to receive money from his family home. So it hardly takes place today, Wabani sabil. But if it happens that someone, he travels and he's cut off from his family, he has no connection to his family, he has no money, he has no backyard where he could draw out the money, then he can be given from the zakat to reach home. Faridatan min Allah, wallahu alimun hakim. And this is a farida from Allah, a compulsion, a farud, a wajib from Allah. Wallahu alimun hakim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one who is the most knowledgeable and the most wise. But in this presentation, we will only deal with 3 groups of people because they are more applicable for our situation. They are the poor and the needy, or the needy and the poor, and the one in debt. Now, all of these people, they must be Muslim. The poor and the needy and the one in debt, they must be Muslim. You can't give zakat to a poor non-Muslim, or a needy non-Muslim, or a non-Muslim who is in debt. If you want to give him from your general wealth, your sadaqah, you want to do general charity and be good, that is okay. But when it comes to zakah, which is a specific act of worship from the 5 pillars of Islam, that cannot be given to the poor and the needy and the one in debt who is a non-Muslim. There are certain cases where zakat can be given to a non-Muslim. As we said, the mu'allafati qulubuhum can be given to a non-Muslim. So now the poor and the needy Muslim, they are the ones who can't afford their yearly needs for themselves and those under them because they can't work or their work is not sufficient. So they are the one who can't afford their yearly needs. Now, zakat has to do with the years, where the zakat is calculated every year and it is given for a year. So someone, for example, who needs $3,000 a month to feed his family and to feed himself and those who is looking after, but he only works for $2,000 a month. So that is, he's short $1,000 per month. So then he's giving the remaining $1,000 for the year. That is, at the end of the year, when zakat is due, he's giving $12,000 to look after his need for one full year. And note that it's not necessary that one person give him his full due. But when he receives his full due, it is not permissible for him to keep taking zakah. So let's say someone come and give him $6,000 and the next person come and give him 6,000. He reached his limit, his need. So by reaching 12,000, he's not needy anymore. He's not poor anymore in the context of zakah. So like if someone else now come and give him, he has to refuse the zakah so long as he know it is zakah. If he doesn't know whether or not it's zakah, that is different. Or if he thinks that the person is giving zakat, he should let him know that he is sufficient, because it's not permissible for him to take that which he has no right to take. He is not considered needy the one who is strong and has the ability to work, but chooses not to work without a prevention. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا حظ فيها لغني ولا لقوي مكتسب. There's no share in it, in the zakat, for the rich, nor for the one who is strong and has the ability to work. So someone who is strong and he has the ability to work, but he decides not to work out of laziness, and there's nothing preventing him from working, even if he's poor, he's not to be given from the zakah. If you want to give him from your general sadaqah, that's up to you. But when it comes to the zakat, he's not to be given from the zakat. And also generally the poor, he's not to be given from the zakat. There are some cases where the poor can be, the rich. The rich is not to be given from the zakat. There are some cases where the rich can be given from the zakat. We will mention one of that with regards to someone who is in debt, inshallah. And with regards to, like, for example, the person who you want to strengthen his Islam, even if he is rich, you can give him from the zakah. But with regards to practically what is applicable to our situation, the rich who is not in need is not to be given from the zakah, and the one who has this ability to work and has the strength to work is not to be given from the zakah. So let's say someone, he has the ability to work, he has the strength to work. Let's say someone, he's driving taxi, and then his car broke down, preventing him from work, and he doesn't have enough money to provide for himself and his family. He can be given the zakah, because now he doesn't have the ability to earn until his situation is rectified, unless he has the ability to do something else. Or maybe he falls sick, so now he can't drive, he can't go out and work, and he doesn't have wealth stored up, he doesn't have savings. He can be given from the zakah. Also, it is not permissible to give zakat to those whom you are responsible for, such as your parents, your grandparents, your children, your grandchildren, your wife. These people, you are responsible for spending upon them if they are in need. So it is not permissible for you to give zakah, because giving zakat to them is like you're giving yourself the money, because you're trying to free yourself of spending upon them. If you give the zakah to someone you think is poor, then it turns out that he is not, your zakah is sufficient. And this is only with the case of poor. The case with a poor person, you think someone is poor and you give him the zakah, and then later on you realize that he wasn't poor, then your zakat is sufficient. You don't need to take back your zakat. And this is only with the case of poor. With the other groups of people, if you give them mistakenly the zakat, if you give someone zakat, for example, if you give someone zakat thinking that he's amilina alayha, thinking that he's working for the zakat, or you give someone zakat thinking that he's mu'allafati qulubuhum, or you think that he is away, he is a traveler who get lost and doesn't have any wealth, those people, if you give them zakat thinking that is the case, and it turns out that is not the case, it is not sufficient. You either leave the money with them and then give another set of zakat, or you try to get back your money and give it to who it is deserving to. But when it comes to the poor, if you give it to the poor, to someone you think it is poor, he's poor, and then you realize that he is not poor, there is no need to take back your zakah or to give an extra zakah. That is sufficient. And it is not necessary to inform the poor that it is zakah. But with the other cases, it's better to inform them so you will know for sure whether you're giving the right person. But as we say, the poor, it is not necessary to inform the person that it is zakah. You can or you cannot. Now, the second group of people, or the third group of people, the poor and the needy, we cover that under one heading. The third, who is the Muslim in debt. They are the ones who borrowed money for something permissible out of need and can't afford to repay it, or it's difficult to repay on time. Or they borrow money to rectify a conflict between two parties. And the person who borrow money to rectify a conflict between two parties, he is giving from the zakat even if he's rich, because he borrowed money not for his personal need, rather to rectify between two parties. Two groups of Muslim, two masjid, they are fighting between each other. Two groups of Muslim, two families are fighting between each other. Someone come and he borrow money and use that money to rectify the affairs, then that person can be given from the zakah even if he is rich. Now, generally, apart from this, the person who borrow money to rectify a conflict, someone who borrowed money for something permissible out of need and can't afford to repay it, or it's difficult to repay on time, he is given from the zakah to the extent of his need. And this, as we say, he borrows the money for something permissible. So someone who borrow money, for example, to travel, to commit sin, someone who borrow money for something that's haram in the first place, or he borrow money in a haram way, someone who borrows money through riba, all of those, they are not permissible to be given from the zakah. Someone borrow money with riba, someone borrow money to commit a sin, or he borrow money without any need to borrow money. He want the most fancy car and he borrow money, and he wants the most fancy house and he borrow money over his need. Those people, they are not given zakah. The one who borrow money for sin or with sin, he's not given zakah, because that is going to help him, and that is helping upon sin. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Do not help each other with sin and transgression. So paying off the debt of someone who borrow money to commit a sin, or borrow money through riba, you're opening the doors for sin. And similarly, the wealth of the Muslim is not to be waste. Someone wants to live an enjoyable life. He wants the most fancy car and luxurious home, and he borrows money. For that case, he's not giving from the zakah anything. It is permissible to give zakah to someone under your care if he is in debt. As we said, those under your care generally are not to be given the zakah. And this is one of the exceptions. If that person is in debt because of something not connected with your spending on him. So for example, you have to spend upon your parents. Your parents is in need. They don't have a job, or they're not working. They do not have the ability to work. So now they become your responsibility, and you have the ability to spend upon them. Your job is sufficient to spend upon them. Now, if you have a family of your own and you cannot afford to spend upon them, then it is not upon you to spend upon them. But so long as you can afford to spend upon them, you have to spend upon them. So now let's say you have to spend upon them, you have the ability to spend upon them, and they cannot afford to work, your parents, and you decide not to spend upon them. And now they went and they borrow money to cover their basic needs. They borrow money to buy food. They borrow money to pay their rent. They borrow money to buy water to drink for their basic needs. Now, you can't give them from your zakah to cover that debt that they borrow money, because the reason they borrow money is because of your responsibility. So that's, again, is like you're trying to free yourself of your responsibility. But if they borrow money for something not connected with your responsibility upon them, that is permissible, then you can give them zakah from your wealth, because that has nothing to do with your responsibility. It is permissible to give zakah to the one who borrow or the one who lend based on what seems better. So now someone borrow $1,000 from a brother. Should you give the person who lend the money directly, or should you give the person who borrowed the money and let him give back the lender the money? Anyone is permissible based on what you seems to be better. If you see that if you give the person who borrowed the money to pay back, he's just going to use all the money and never going to pay back, or he's going to eat the money out and sport out the money and he's not going to pay back, then you go directly to the person who lent him and you give him the money. Otherwise, you give the person who borrowed the money and let him pay off his own debt. And as we said, the email question for classes, you can ask any question, and inshallah ta'ala, there will be a video if there are any questions dedicated to answer all the questions, inshallah ta'ala. Or if you want the PDF, you can send an email for the PDF. If something you think I made a mistake or so, you can also notify me, inshallah ta'ala, and I will review it. So with this, we end our presentation on zakah. Walillahi alhamd. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us, to forgive us for whatever mistakes we may have made. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us what will benefit us, and to benefit us by that which He have taught us. هذا وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.